Details have recently emerged from a credible source of a possible terror threat in the New York City and Washington, D.C. areas, just as the 10th anniversary of 9/11 approaches. To address such threats, the United States government has a long history of taking away your civil liberties and claiming somehow that will make you safer. But have we given up too many of our rights? Supporters of GOP presidential hopeful Ron Paul have formed a super PAC to tap into that sentiment. Take a listen to a portion of their new ad.
As our forefathers before us pledged their lives and fortunes, so shall we.
Bring the troops home.
We're into the fourth year now of this recession. We can get out of this trouble by sending only people to Washington who will obey the Constitution.
Who will follow the Constitution. Here to discuss our radio host Mike Church and economic historian Tom Woods. I understand that this is a promo for the Super PAC for ads that will come.
That's right. RevolutionPAC.com is where we're premiering some really kick-you-know-what ads for Ron.
How is it that the government has been able to sell us, Tom, on the idea that by restricting human liberty, it can somehow keep us safer?
Well, one thing they've tried to do is assure us that, don't worry, any infringements on your civil liberties, these are just going to be imposed on the bad guys. It's never going to happen to you. So it's okay that since 2008, the FBI, as most people don't realize, now has the power to start an investigation of you, to follow you around, to watch you 24 hours a day. Even if you've been accused of nothing, they don't even suspect you of anything, they can just start following you around. And what actually happens is that these powers wind up being used against people who are politically unpopular.
We fought the revolution against a British government in large measure because Parliament authorized British soldiers to write their own search warrants. And now under the Patriot Act, we have enabled federal agents, not just FBI, but even those goons at the TSA, to write their own search warrants. Basically, the agent authorizing him or herself to enter into your property or to go through your computer files. How does that make us safer?
I don't know how it makes it safer, but it certainly makes us dumber. Because we put up with this. If you think back to 1798, this thing called the Alien and Sedition Acts, It took 6 months for Thomas Jefferson and James Madison to say, we don't like this. Let's call the Virginia Assembly. Let's call the Kentucky Assembly. Let's do this thing called nullification. Try to wipe it off the books.
You're the world's expert on nullification. So 6 months after the Alien and Sedition Act, which allowed the government to prosecute people whose words put certain government officials into disrepute, like making fun of the president's waistline, for which a congressman from Vermont was notoriously prosecuted. 6 months, and 2 states had nullified it. Has any state nullified the Patriot Act, or are people afraid to tinker with this thing?
I think in part it's because they don't see the seriousness of the problem. Because so far we now have discovered that antiwar.com, which has a lot of conservatives and libertarians on it who are upset about foreign policy, has been investigated for perhaps being influenced by a foreign power. Like, you have to be influenced by a foreign power to disagree with this foreign policy. Greenpeace and People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals have been harassed. And so we think, well, we don't like those groups, so who cares? But think about the way we've seen governments define what constitutes a domestic terrorist, right? They define it in a way that sounds like a regular American. So be very careful before you say, oh, I trust the government, I trust the government. Remember Thomas Jefferson, who said, don't tell me about having confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution.
By the chains of the Constitution. Does anybody in government take the Constitution seriously? Jim Clyburn, who's the #3 ranking Democrat, once told me on another show that I was hosting, when I asked him where in the Constitution is the federal government authorized to manage health care, it was during the debate on Obamacare, he looked at me and he said, Judge, most of what we do down here is not authorized by the Constitution, and then laughed.
I think it's funny that during a presidential debate for the Republican Party, Congressman Ron Paul will say, we need to legalize the Constitution. Just imagine this concept here, legalize the Constitution. Oh, you mean when you take an oath, you actually mean what you say and you saying what you mean. So the Constitution, as we used to know, or as it used to limit the federal government, and that's the purpose of having a written document, is to say this is what you may do, not what you can do.
When Congressman Paul the other night said we need to legalize the Constitution, and apparently during a break in the debate, he was approached by the governor of his home state, also on the stage with him, Governor Rick Perry. I want to show the photograph of the week, which shows Ron Paul and Rick Perry sort of doing what? Take a look at this and tell me what you think is happening here. Tom, is Governor Perry saying, Ron, out of my face? Is Congressman Paul saying, I've got First Amendment rights, Governor, and I'll say whatever I want? What do you think?
I think the governor is saying, stop telling the truth about me. I mean, the Gardasil thing is bad enough, but now we know that his former chief of staff was a lobbyist for Merck. I mean, the whole thing has Big Pharma tool written all over it.
All right.
And the fact that Ron was critical of Ronald Reagan for spending too much, great. It shows he has some principles.
Mike Church, Tom Woods, it's a pleasure. Thank you for joining.